This story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. What you've heard so far is nothing compared to what is about to begin. No more talking. Let's start the story.
I did not think it was real, Claire Hutchins whispered, her voice still trembling as she recalled the shadows. I do now. The Spanish moss hangs like tattered shrouds from the ancient live oaks of Savannah, Georgia. Beneath the heavy, humid air, the night stretches long and deep across the cobblestones, hiding secrets that refuse to stay buried.
She had walked into that historic city exactly like anyone else would, viewing the famous local ghost stories as nothing more than charming atmosphere. Just a quaint way to make the old streets feel a little more interesting. But the dead? The dead have a way of making themselves known.
It was the sweltering summer of 2017. Claire, a 38-year-old graphic designer, was drowning in the fresh, agonizing grief of losing her mother to cancer. She was desperate for an escape. She needed a place where the walls didn't echo with the silence of her immense loss, a completely new city to try and mend the shattered pieces of her life.
She found what she thought was a haven on Whitaker Street, an 1847 antebellum townhouse, its old bricks weathered by centuries of storms. She rented the garden-level unit, sinking into the quiet relief of her new home on July 6th. The heavy wooden doors closed behind her, and for a fleeting moment she genuinely felt she was safe.
But the quiet she sought was a terrifying illusion. The air in that garden-level unit was thick, oppressive. Just 5 days into her lease, the deep shadows of the apartment began to stir, waking up to the presence of the new life breathing within its walls.
On the night of July 11th, a wireless speaker, fully charged and resting in the dimly lit living room, simply died. It didn't glitch or fade, it was suffocated. Claire turned it back on, her heart fluttering, but 45 seconds later, the power was smothered again. She tried to rationalize it in the dark, but just 3 nights later, the darkness brought something entirely impossible to ignore.
The clock read 1 a.m. Claire lay paralyzed beneath her sheets. The doors were deadbolted, the windows were locked shut, yet from the other side of her bedroom wall came the unmistakable, heavy patter of small, bare feet running across the hardwood. Then came the laughter, high, bright, and perfectly clear. It was the most frightening thing she had ever heard. The instant her trembling hand clicked on the bedside lamp, dead silence.
Desperate, trembling in the early morning light, Claire sought out the man upstairs. Dr. Warren Okafor was a retired English professor who had spent a decade unearthing the bones of the building's past. He invited her in, his face growing grave beneath the flickering incandescent lights of his study, as she recounted the laughter in the dark.
He spoke of the summer of 1858. The air in Savannah had turned to poison during a brutal yellow fever epidemic. The original owners of the home, Aldous and Margaret Beckett, had survived the agonizing purge, but their 3 young children, aged 4, 7, and 9, were not so fortunate. They all perished one after another, within 8 terrifying days that August.
Then, Dr. Okafor revealed the true horror of her sanctuary. Back in 1858, the garden-level unit, Claire's apartment, was the coolest part of the house during the sweltering heat. It was the quarantine zone. Claire was sleeping in the exact room where those 3 children were locked away, suffocating in the grip of the fever until they took their final breaths.
A profound chill settled deep into Claire's bones, yet she couldn't bring herself to run. Her own overwhelming grief anchored her to the tragedy of the space. But the entities lingering in the dark were no longer content with merely being heard. They were hungry to be seen.
The days bled into nights of escalating dread. She had learned their tragic history on July 16th. A week later, on the 23rd, the unseen took physical form. And by early August, the shadows would reveal their faces completely, crossing the boundary between the past and the present. It happened after a late-night shower. Steam drifted down the narrow, dark hallway, fogging the glass of a massive, antique mirror left behind in the unit. As Claire wiped the condensation away, her hand froze. Pressed flat against the clouded glass were 3 distinct sets of small, child-sized handprints. They lingered there, pressed from the outside, layered at 3 different heights. Staring at those tiny, impossible impressions fading in the mist, Claire felt a crushing weight in her chest. It wasn't just raw terror anymore. It felt, in the worst possible way, like grief recognizing grief.
Her shattered heart was bleeding into the sorrow trapped within those ancient walls.
The suffocating tension broke completely on the night of August 2nd. Claire sat entirely alone, the cold blue glow of her laptop illuminating the dark room. She was endlessly scrolling through old photographs of her late mother, searching for any comfort. Instead, her eyes caught on a picture she had taken on her phone weeks earlier, on July 19th, a picture of her supposedly empty living room.
Deep in the shadows, near the tall, dark window, stood 3 small figures. 2 boys and a girl. They were draped in heavy, dark, old-fashioned clothing, entirely unnatural for the blistering Georgia summer, and their faces, pale, hollow, and turned directly toward the camera, toward Claire. A professional photographer later examined the file, his blood running cold as he confirmed. The image was completely unaltered. There were no tricks of the light. They were truly there.
Trembling, Claire showed the glowing screen to Dr. Okafor. He stared at the pale faces of the Beckett children for a long, heavy silence. When he finally handed the phone back, his voice was barely a whisper in the gloom. "I think they wanted you to know they were there."
That whisper echoed in her mind, shattering any remaining illusion of safety. The barrier between the living and the dead had dissolved completely. They weren't just echoes of the past, they were present, watching her from the dark corners of her own home.
She couldn't stay another night. On August 10th, she broke her lease, abandoned her deposit, and fled to a modern high-rise across the city. A place of sterile concrete and steel, devoid of ghosts. Yet even as she escaped the physical grip of Whitaker Street, she could not bring herself to delete the photograph. The pale faces of the children remain locked inside her phone, a haunting digital burden she carries everywhere.
Months later, sitting safely in a brightly lit room, she scoured the archives of the Georgia Historical Society. The faded ink on the 1858 death records confirmed the names of the specters who had stood in her living room: Henry Beckett, James Beckett, and little Clara Beckett. The shadows finally had their names.
It was a tragic, mirrored dance of souls refusing to fade. A grieving daughter, desperate for her mother to be remembered, sharing a dark, suffocating space with 3 lost children reaching out across a century and a half, just to prove they still existed, just to ensure they were seen.
Was it simply a haunting, or did Claire's raw, agonizing grief tear open a doorway in the dark, calling out to the sorrow lingering in the floorboards? Henry, James, and Claire Beckett are still waiting in the deep shadows of Whitaker Street, and perhaps they are waiting for you to see them too. If you survived this journey into the dark, leave a comment, share your own paranormal experiences, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more chilling true stories.
Moving on to the next one, this story was sent by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. He requested us not to reveal his name because he is still afraid. He claims that after that night, he has never been able to sleep normally again. No more talking, let's start the story. My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 34 years old, I work as a dental hygienist, and I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts. I bought a 1940s Craftsman home on Mercer Lane for $189,000, thinking it was just a perfect real estate investment, a fresh start after my divorce. I never expected it to unravel into a waking nightmare. The history trapped in those walls, it's something I can't unsee. To make sense of what happened, I have to walk you through it exactly as it unfolded. The baseline of logic I tried to cling to, the timeline of anomalies that shattered it, the antique mirror, the historical evidence I uncovered, the breaking point that drove me out, and finally, what you must know about investigating your own home before it's too late. The baseline of logic. Establishing my credibility is the only way you'll believe me. I was raised by an engineer and a nurse. My entire upbringing was focused heavily on science, on measurement, on the physical, tangible world. I wasn't primed to see ghosts, I was primed to find structural flaws. But the Mercer Lane experience, it was completely unexplainable. It defied every ounce of logic I had built my life upon. The irrationality of it hit me so much harder because I was relentlessly practical. Growing up, we didn't talk about the supernatural. We talked about science, about logic, about things that could be explained and measured. So when the strange things began, I systematically exhausted every single rational explanation. I brought in pest control to check for dead mice. I had my best friend Kayla sweep the house with me. I even told myself I was hallucinating from the stress of the divorce. I tried absolutely everything before accepting the impossible. What followed was a strict timeline of anomalies. The first unexplained events that began chipping away at my sanity. I moved in on September 7th, 2019. The first week was quiet, idyllic even. But exactly 1 week later, on September 14th around 10:30 p.m., it started. A heavy, sweet smell, like rotting flowers or a funeral home left out in the summer heat, concentrated entirely inside the walk-in closet of my master bedroom. I thought it was a dead animal. But 3 nights later, on September 17th near 11 p.m., the scent returned. And this time, it brought something else with it. Lying frozen in my bed in the dark, I heard it. Slow, deep, rhythmic breathing coming from inside the closet. It lasted for 4 or 5 agonizing minutes. This wasn't the settling of an old house or wind in the pipes. This was the distinct, heavy sound of respiration in a completely empty space. The pest control inspector found absolutely nothing, but I knew what I heard. Then there was the antique mirror, the moment the terror became a visual manifestation. Until then, it was just smells and sounds. But on September 21st, the nightmare crossed into the visual world through an original antique mirror left in the upstairs hallway. There was a terrifying disconnect between reality and the reflection. I was just walking to the bathroom. In reality, I was wearing a gray t-shirt and blue-striped pajama pants. But when I stopped and glanced at my reflection, it was my face. It was my hair. But I was wearing a long, old-fashioned white dress from the 1950s. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. When I looked again, the reflection had snapped back to my gray t-shirt. Just like that. That impossible moment forced me to confront my realtor, Sandra Briggs. The disclosures I finally wrung out of her revealed a sickening pattern. The house had been listed twice in the past 8 years. Both times, the previous owners packed up and left the property in under a year, completely unexplained. And the prior listing agent? She had abruptly retired and fled to Florida. My $189,000 bargain suddenly made a very dark, very terrifying kind of sense. I needed historical evidence. I started digging into the 1963 records. Since the realtor wouldn't tell me the truth, I went to the Buncombe County Register of Deeds. I digitized old newspaper archives to find hard facts. The house was built in 1947 by Thomas Whitfield. He lived there with his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor Whitfield died on March 3rd, 1963, at just 41 years old. The official cause was listed as heart failure. But I dug deeper and found a buried local news article published 2 weeks after her death. A 1963 neighbor reported to the police that in the weeks before she died, Eleanor would stand out on the porch in the middle of the night, staring into the tree line, speaking to an unseen entity. Reading those old records, the horrifying truth crashed directly into my reality. Eleanor Whitfield had died in my bedroom, in the room with the closet, the exact spot where the rotting flower smell and the heavy breathing originated. October was the breaking point, a rapid escalation. As September bled into October, the haunting turned aggressive. The momentum was relentless. On October 4th, I came home to find every single kitchen cabinet thrown wide open. October 9th, exactly at 3:17 a.m., a delicate phantom music box started playing in the dark. October 12th, my beagle, Cooper, violently refused to cross the threshold of the master bedroom, trembling uncontrollably all night. It was escalating. I was undeniably no longer alone in my own home. Desperate, I finally knocked on the door of my 70-year-old neighbor, Harold Pritchett. He lived next door for over 3 decades. Harold just looked at me and confirmed my worst fears. Multiple families had experienced the exact same things, including a little girl who used to talk about the lady in the white dress. Harold was blunt. He told me, "I think she just doesn't know she's gone. Eleanor, I think she's still waiting for something." Then came October 19th. I have never sleepwalked a day in my life, but I woke up at 2 a.m., standing completely rigid in the pitch-dark master bedroom closet. My hand was pressed flat against the cold wood paneling, and from just behind the wall, or maybe hovering right next to my ear, a woman's voice whispered, "Don't leave me here." I broke my lease. I abandoned the property within 2 weeks and left my security deposit behind. I never looked back. Now I'm begging you to start investigating your own home. These are my key takeaways for home buyers. 6 months after I ran from Mercer Lane, I made one final post-move discovery. I found a 1961 church directory photograph of Eleanor Whitfield. In the picture, she was standing on the home's wraparound porch. She was wearing the exact same old-fashioned white dress I saw reflecting my own face in that antique mirror. And in the photo, Eleanor was staring off camera at something unseen. The house sold again in early 2020 to someone who has no idea. If you are ever buying a home, your due diligence has to go beyond the plumbing and the roof. Ask exactly why the previous owners left. Check the duration of past residencies. If people keep fleeing, it is a massive red flag. Investigate the history of the land and the walls. And above all else, if something feels inherently wrong, if you smell rotting flowers in an empty room, trust your instincts. Property laws and realtor disclosures might protect the financial value of a home, but they will never protect you from the history trapped inside it. So ask yourself, what history is hidden in the walls of your home right now? And are you absolutely sure you're the only one living there? If you survived this story, please like this video, leave a comment with your own paranormal experiences, and subscribe to our channel for more dark histories. Moving on to the next one, this story was sent by a viewer. The incident is so strange that it's hard to tell whether it was real or just a nightmare. No more talking, let's start the story. The ink dried on February 19th. A pristine 1960s ranch-style home on Cartwright Road, $274,000. It was supposed to be a fresh start for the Webb family, a safe haven. Instead, it became a trap. I want you to imagine stepping into a house where the shadows seem just a little too deep, where the night presses heavily against the windows, and where logic, the very thing you rely on to keep you safe, completely falls apart. Marcus Webb was 41, a high school history teacher, a junior varsity baseball coach, a man whose feet were firmly planted in the real world. He didn't want to believe in the things that bump in the night. He fought against it, hard. He told himself there were rational explanations for everything. But the thing waiting inside that house didn't care about his skepticism. It didn't need his belief to breathe. The descent happened horribly fast. They moved in on February 27th, unpacking boxes, claiming bedrooms, filling the empty space with the warmth of a family. 9-year-old Tyler and 6-year-old Lily were thrilled, but just 4 days later, March 3rd, the illusion of safety shattered. 4 days, that's all it took for the house to wake up. The digital clock by Marcus's bed glowed red in the dark, 11:45 p.m. He had just clicked off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into absolute blackness. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Tyler. Now, Tyler was a confident kid. He never had nightmares. He never needed a nightlight. But at 11:45 p.m., he stood there, pale, rigid, his voice shaking in the dark. "Dad," he whispered, "there's a man standing in my room." This wasn't just a bad dream that faded with the morning sun. Over the next 2 weeks, the boy saw the exact same thing 4 more times. The description never changed. Tall, impossibly thin, always standing absolutely still near the window, wrapped in a heavy, dark coat. It never spoke, it never reached out, it just watched. And the eyes. Tyler said they weren't red or glowing, they were just empty holes, like someone turned the lights off. Every time, Marcus tore that room apart. Every time, he found nothing but deep shadows. Marcus clung to reason like a drowning man holding on to a piece of driftwood. It's just the stress of the move, he told himself. It's just the unfamiliar shadows cast by the streetlights outside, an overactive imagination. But reality was tearing that driftwood right out of his hands. 5 separate incidents, the exact same chilling details. His logical mind was breaking against something he couldn't explain. And soon, the shadows started stepping out of the night. Around March 10th, the nightmare bled into the daylight. Marcus's wife, Diane, was downstairs in the kitchen making coffee. The house was quiet, too quiet. And then, right above her head, in the master bedroom, footsteps. A heavy, deliberate tread, pressing down hard on the floorboards, pacing, back and forth, back and forth. She called out, thinking Marcus had stayed home from the high school. Silence answered her. She was entirely alone in the house. When she told Marcus, he immediately blamed the architecture. "It's an old 1960s house," he said. "The pipes are expanding, the old wood is settling." But settling wood doesn't walk. These sounds weren't random creaks. They were predictable every single morning exactly between 7:15 and 7:45 a.m., localized only to that one specific room. The heavy tread of something pacing in a cage. Desperate to prove to his wife, and maybe himself, that they were just hearing things, Marcus set a trap. A small security camera placed high in the corner of the master bedroom, its lens capturing the entire floor. He left it running for a week. The plan was simple. Watch the footage during that cursed half-hour window, see the empty room, and put the ghost story to rest once and for all. Most of the week, the room sat empty, silent, just dust drifting in the morning light. But on 2 separate mornings, right as the clock hit the time of the footsteps, the camera didn't just glitch. It didn't turn to static. The feed went pitch, suffocating black, for exactly 90 seconds. It was as if something remarkably tall and solid had stepped directly in front of the lens, eclipsing the light entirely. And then, 90 seconds later, it stepped away. Marcus couldn't trust his own eyes anymore. He handed the footage over to his colleague, Derek, a computer science teacher who knew the tech inside and out. Derek ran it through every diagnostic. He checked for software errors, power failures, anything. His conclusions stripped away Marcus's last layer of denial. The camera was flawless. The darkness was a physical obstruction. Something solid had stood in that locked, completely empty room. There was nowhere left for Marcus to hide. The house wasn't settling. His son wasn't lying. Something was there. And to find out what, he had to dig into the dirt of the past. He needed to know who lived there before them, who died there. Gerald Foss, the elderly man who owned the house and passed away the previous November. Marcus tracked down Gerald's distant nephew in Portland, desperate for a rational answer. What he got instead was a warning. The moment Marcus mentioned the strange occurrences, the nephew's voice dropped. "How's the basement?" he asked. Gerald Foss hadn't just lived in that house. For 10 years, he had sealed himself down in the unfinished concrete basement. He believed he was talking to something in the dark. He had frantically scrawled over every inch of the concrete walls with a thick black marker. Bizarre symbols, names, and the nephew shuddered when he described the smell down there. Not rot, just stale, wrong. The real estate agents had simply slapped a fresh coat of white paint over the madness and sold it to Marcus. On the cold night of March 22nd, Marcus sent his wife and kids away. He couldn't risk them being in the house. He walked down the wooden stairs into the basement alone. He set a harsh, glaring utility light right in the center of the concrete floor. The walls were blindingly white, fresh and clean. But as he crept closer, the light caught a flaw. Down near the floorboards, the new paint had bubbled. It had cracked, and bleeding through those cracks, thick, black ink was pushing its way to the surface. He dropped to his knees, peeling back the white flakes, photographing the frantic words hidden beneath. Later that night, alone in the quiet house, he searched the names he found. They weren't random scribbles. They were dead people. Local Salem obituaries. People who had died within 10 miles of Cartwright Road, completely unconnected to Gerald Foss. Like Denny Ruiz, a 7-year-old boy who drowned in a freezing pond decades ago. Gerald had been summoning the local dead, writing their names in the dark. The activity in the house was escalating, swelling like a diseased lung. March 28th, the deepest part of the night. At exactly 2:33 a.m., the terrible silence was violently torn apart. It wasn't a thump, it wasn't a footstep. It was his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, screaming, a raw, guttural animal shriek of pure terror. Marcus didn't think, he ran. He sprinted down the black hallway and smashed her door open. Lily was frozen in her bed, her eyes wide, locked onto the empty corner of her bedroom. Marcus followed her terrified stare. Nothing. Just the dark corners of a child's room. But as he stepped toward it, the air itself changed, a physical impossibility. A pocket of absolute concentrated, freezing cold radiated from that corner. In a heated house in late March, Marcus stood in his daughter's room and watched his own breath turn to white mist in the air. He snatched Lily from the bed and dragged her out into the hall. She was completely catatonic. She didn't cry, she didn't shake. For 20 minutes, she stared blankly ahead into nothing. And when she finally opened her mouth, her voice was dead, stripped of all emotion. She looked at her father and whispered, "Daddy, he said he lives here now." That was it, the breaking point. They didn't wait around for the next morning. Within days, the Webb family packed whatever they could carry and fled. They took a massive financial hit, dumping the house back onto the market just to get out alive. They didn't care about the money anymore.
They just needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Cartwright Road. Before the final papers were signed, Marcus made one last, agonizing trip back to grab the final boxes. Broad daylight. He just wanted to get in and get out. He walked down the silent hallway, and he stopped dead. The door to the basement. He had personally closed and locked it tight before they fled. The metal key was still heavy in his pocket, but the door was standing wide open, a gaping black maw in the hallway. And drifting up from the dark bottom of the stairs, breathing right into his face, was that smell. Stale. Wrong. Like something that had been buried for a long time, finally taking a breath. He dropped the boxes and ran.
8 months later, a new family moved in. Unaware, untouched by the history hidden beneath the fresh paint. Gerald Voss spent a decade in that basement, whispering in the dark, communicating with something he didn't understand. And when he died, he didn't end the conversation. He left the door open. He left it waiting. Tyler still sleeps with the lights on, because whatever Gerald invited into the walls of that house, it answered. And it is still there, waiting for the lights to go out. If you survived this terrifying true story, make sure you like this video, leave a comment about what you would have done in the Webb family's shoes, and subscribe to our channel for more dark, immersive horror. You can also send us your true horror stories. If you've experienced something terrifying yourself, or if something scary happened to your family members, relatives, or friends, share it with us. Real paranormal experiences, creepy incidents, unexplained events, or any disturbing true story are welcome. Send your true horror stories in this email.